It started with little things. Moments where I'd speak and she'd pretend not to hear, then shift the conversation to something that made her feel more interesting. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her job had gotten more demanding, and she'd recently started this whole conscious expansion phase. Breathwork, raw diets, and manifestation journals. I figured she'd grow out of it. But as the weeks stretched, so did the distance between us. Whenever I suggested we set aside time for a movie night, or even just coffee on the balcony, her expression tightened. "You're suffocating me," she'd mutter, not even making eye contact. "You don't need to manage my schedule." I wasn't managing anything. I missed her. That was the simple truth. We used to laugh at the most ridiculous things. Now, every conversation ended with her talking about her frequency or how some workshop helped her detach from codependent energies. I wasn't sure when spending time with your partner became a red flag for codependency. One night, I mentioned planning a weekend getaway. A simple beach town, quiet. Somewhere we used to go before her calendar got swallowed by breathwork circles and moon rituals. She tilted her head and gave me that look, as if I were an outdated app. "You're trying to trap me into something predictable," she said flatly. "This is your need for control showing again." I blinked. "You mean us spending time together is me being controlling?" She rolled her eyes and sipped her green sludge smoothie. "You're projecting." It wasn't just the deflection. It was the condescension. Like every normal human need was suddenly beneath her enlightenment. I started keeping to myself more, not out of anger, but because every effort to reconnect was twisted into some accusation of emotional tyranny. She wasn't always like this. A year ago, she was fiery but grounded. We shared routines, cooked together, binge-watched trashy shows, even argued about politics just to stir the pot. But after her retreat in Tulum, something cracked open. She returned with beaded bracelets and a permanent smirk, dropping phrases like energy boundaries and third-dimensional shackles anytime I brought up things like rent or shared chores. She started wearing robes instead of regular clothes, lit incense before breakfast. At first, it was eccentric. Then it became unbearable. Her new friends, who all had names like Sienna Moon or Lightroot, would drop by unannounced, fill the place with sage smoke, and talk about soul contracts and vibrational misalignments. I'd retreat to the bedroom, sit on the edge of the bed, and stare at my laptop, pretending to work while they laughed about men who lived in scarcity mindsets. I wasn't sure what that even meant anymore, but I was pretty sure I had become the punchline. Then came the night in the kitchen. I had just finished washing the dishes. She was scrolling through her phone, barefoot, wearing one of her gauzy kimonos with Sanskrit symbols on the hem. I walked in and said, "I think we need to talk. Really talk. You and I haven't connected in weeks." She didn't look up. Her thumbs kept moving across the screen. Then she sighed, placed the phone on the counter, and finally raised her eyes. There was no warmth in them, just irritation, like I was a waiter who brought her the wrong wine. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said with a crooked smile, "Can't handle my vibe? Pack up." The words dropped like a glass shattering on tile. Her tone was casual, even teasing, but it held an edge sharp enough to slice skin. She laughed softly, like it was some kind of cosmic joke only she understood. I didn't respond, just nodded once, turned around, and walked out of the kitchen. I wasn't about to perform for her audience of one. Inside the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room we once painted together. Her side was a kaleidoscope of crystals, dried flowers, and books with titles like Unlocking the Divine Matrix. My side looked like it belonged to someone who had overstayed his welcome. I reached into the closet, pulled out my hoodie, and slid my phone into the front pocket. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear. She left 10 minutes later. I heard the roll of her suitcase and her voice calling for the Uber. A minute or two after that, she knocked lightly on the bedroom door. "I'm going to my Thursday wine night. Don't wait up." Her voice was sugar-dusted sarcasm. Before I could respond, she was gone. Silence settled over the apartment. Thick. Final. That gave me space to breathe. And more importantly, think. I stood in the doorway, scanning the room and taking a mental inventory. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year. "Hey," I said as soon as he picked up. "You still got that pickup truck?" My brother didn't hesitate. "Always. What's going on?" "I need 2 hours. No questions. Just quiet help." "I'll be there in half an hour." I hung up, then exhaled. She said, "Pack up." and I heard her loud and clear. But she'd mistaken silence for weakness, and I was about to show her the difference. As the front door clicked shut behind her, I stood still in the hallway. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have, thick with finality. I waited, listening to the fading hum of tires over wet pavement. Her Uber pulled away, its taillights catching the edge of the living room window like a warning flare. That was it. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. My screen lit up, 7:47 p.m. I texted my brother, "Bring the van, silent mode, side entrance. I'll be ready." His reply came instantly. 20 minutes. Let's get you out. I stood and moved with intention. I walked to the coat closet and retrieved an old canvas bag. From the top shelf, I pulled down a folder labeled Personal Inventory. Inside were checklists, handwritten columns of what I'd brought into the marriage, receipts, photo logs. I reviewed them with methodical clarity. Then I opened the dresser and began laying out items that belonged entirely to me. The first pile, tools, camera, laptop. Next, passport, birth certificate, documents with my name alone. I checked off each item, folded them carefully, and placed them into neat stacks near the entrance. I handled everything like a museum curator preparing for a discreet relocation. Her side of the room remained untouched. Books on chakras, linen wraps, crystals, and tiny glass dishes. Each piece of her new world was left as is. I had no interest in dividing household trinkets. This was about retrieval, not revenge. The doorbell rang once. I opened it quietly. My brother stood in the rain wearing a hoodie and work gloves. No words, just a nod. He handed me a paper bag from the hardware store. Inside were 5 large moving boxes and a roll of packing tape. "Got the van parked under the stairwell," he said. "Back doors face the exit. Let's move like shadows." We stepped inside, and I began assembling the boxes. He stood by the kitchen, arms folded, waiting for direction. I pointed to the stacks by the door. "We start here. Keep the sequence. I'm photographing each set before it goes in." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. For every item I placed inside a box, I took a photo of its original location. Frame by frame, I captured the shape of a life exiting. This wasn't sentimentality, it was evidence. Quiet insurance. We worked fast. The first box is filled with electronics. The second holds personal keepsakes, including journals, yearbooks, and gifts from my parents. The third contained clothing, the kind I wore before she started styling my wardrobe to match her energy. The fourth was reserved for my workshop gear, tools she'd never touched but always claimed were cluttering the vibe. The fifth, the final one, was light, containing a framed picture of my grandparents, some old vinyl records, and one leather-bound notebook I hadn't opened in years. 2 hours later, the apartment stood bare in all the places I once occupied. The couch still carried her throw pillows, and incense sticks lined the window. Nothing appeared to be broken or out of place, and yet it was unmistakably altered. An imprint had vanished. I walked into the kitchen and found her affirmation cards scattered across the counter, like forgotten tarot cards. I placed my wedding ring in the center of the deck. It glinted beneath the overhead light, catching edges of phrases like "you are whole" and "release the old." Next to it, I laid my apartment key and a handwritten note on folded printer paper. The ink was steady, no crossed-out words. I read it once, then again, and left it in place. "You said pack." I did. Zero responsibility from me. Everything else is in writing. Beneath the signature, I dated it. The moment deserved a timestamp. My brother stood by the door holding the final box. I gave the apartment a slow once-over. "Garage?" he asked. "Yeah. Stack them behind the workbench. I'll sort it tomorrow." He locked up behind us. We moved silently down the stairs, taking each step carefully. Outside, the rain had tapered to a mist. The streetlights made halos in the fog. Inside the van, we rode without music. My phone vibrated once. Likely her, messaging about some wine-fueled epiphany or a meme she thought I'd find amusing. I ignored it. This moment wasn't for replies. Back at my brother's place, we stacked the boxes with quiet precision. He handed me a clean towel, and I wiped the sweat from my neck. "Couch is yours," he said, tossing me a spare blanket. "You're safe here." I nodded, took the pillow, and sank into the cushions. Sleep wouldn't come easily, but peace had arrived early. He flipped his phone onto silent and placed it face down on the coffee table. The screen lit up once. Then again. Notifications stacked like bricks. I didn't check mine. I already knew what was waiting. The living room smelled like sawdust and lemon cleaner. Outside, the wind tapped the window with restless fingers. I stared at the ceiling, listening to nothing. She had spoken in fireworks. Loud, bright, fleeting. I had responded with cardboard, ink, and exit routes. Tomorrow, I'd deal with logistics. Tonight, I had space. She arrived a little past midnight. Her footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway before the jingle of her keys broke through the silence. The door swung open with its usual soft creak, followed by a careless thud as her heels met the floor. Then came the clatter of her handbag on the side table and the familiar hum of her voice as she called out something half-drunk and playful, expecting a sarcastic response or maybe silence, her favorite kind of tension. Instead, only emptiness met her. I imagine the pause came when she noticed the living room. Something subtle at first, the absence of my jacket draped over the back of the chair, maybe the side table clear where my phone usually sat charging. The bookshelf looked fuller without gaps, but to someone who knew what had once filled those spaces, it probably seemed strangely hollow. She might have stared at the couch, confused by its newfound symmetry. One half no longer held the indentation of the man who had spent so many evenings there trying to start a conversation. Her shoes tapped once more, hesitantly this time. A few steps forward, then a soft shuffle as if she were checking for something out of place, only to find that every inch of the apartment had shifted in some subtle, irreversible way. She moved into the kitchen, still humming a song from her ride home. I know her routine. She would have tossed her keys into the ceramic bowl beside the sink. Except there were already keys inside. Not hers. Mine. And next to them sat the ring. She never wore hers. She had always said rings restricted her flow. I had worn mine every day, even when I worked on the car, even when I knew no one would see it. It had left a faint groove on my finger, a silent reminder of something that used to matter. I imagined she stood there, staring at that small, circular symbol resting on top of her affirmation cards like a punctuation mark after a long-winded sentence. Maybe her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, trying to understand if it was some kind of warning, or worse, a conclusion. The note was just beneath the ring, folded in half, unsealed, and placed with deliberate neatness. Her name wasn't on it, because she didn't need to be told it was for her. The handwriting was mine, too familiar to mistake for anyone else's. I'm sure she read it twice, maybe 3 times. She likely whispered something to herself. Is this real? Or seriously? Then glanced around in disbelief, hoping to find signs of a prank, some hidden camera, or at least a jacket slung carelessly across a chair to break the spell. None appeared. The apartment remained in perfect balance. Uneven, stripped of the weight she had once pretended wasn't there. That's when the text started. My phone vibrated once, then again, then 5 times in a row. I let it lie face down on the coffee table as I sat in my brother's workshop, eyes fixed on a photo I'd taken before leaving. The countertop, the ring, her cards are beneath it. A still-life portrait of the moment I handed her everything she had asked for. Her messages arrived in a flood. Where are you? What kind of ring is this? Why are all your things missing? Are you serious right now? Each one buzzed with urgency that hadn't existed in our relationship for months. The same woman who once declared herself a vessel of divine detachment now scrambled to make sense of what she never thought would happen. I waited. When the string of messages paused long enough for me to believe she was finally expecting silence, I answered with a single line. You asked, I did it. The rest, through the post office or a lawyer. Then nothing more. After that, I set the phone to do not disturb and placed it beside my drink. My brother had gone to bed, leaving the workshop light dimmed, casting long shadows across the garage floor. I leaned back on the bench, hands behind my head, exhaling with the steady control of someone who had rehearsed his escape long before the door was ever opened. I pictured her pacing the apartment, circling rooms that suddenly felt colder. Maybe she opened drawers, pulled back the closet doors, expecting to find a suitcase or even a backpack left behind like an unfinished goodbye. All she saw was absence. Even the router was gone. I remembered uninstalling it earlier that evening, winding the cords neatly before placing the equipment into a labeled box. A clean break, digital and otherwise. Around 1:30 a.m., another burst of messages came through. Angrier now. Defensive. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a fight. You could have talked to me. This is childish. I didn't mean it like that. I left her unread. She'd find her answers where they had always been, between the lines of her declarations. Between wine nights and crystal bowls, she taught herself to view me as excess weight. Now that it had been lifted, the gravity of the void was hers to explore. From my seat in the workshop, I could hear the gentle tick of the old clock my brother kept above the door. The minutes passed with quiet finality, each one carving a little more distance between what had been and what now existed. Tomorrow, paperwork would begin. Logistics, calls, forms, the language of boundaries in black ink. But for now, this quiet was mine. Earned, sharp, and necessary. She threw phrases like confetti. I responded with disappearance. The morning came quietly, wrapped in the smell of burnt toast and machine oil. My brother's kitchen had a calming stillness to it, like a place that had seen pain but didn't demand conversation. I sat by the window, mug in hand, steam curling toward the glass as I opened my laptop and started drafting the list. Each item came from memory: joint bills, split subscriptions, and account details. Everything we once shared now felt like debris to be sorted. I was methodical, clear-headed. A decade of marriage unraveled faster when the emotional thread had already frayed long ago. I made the first official call to our building manager. Yes, I'd like to remove myself from the lease beginning next month. His voice was surprised. Is everything all right? I answered plainly, just streamlining obligations. He confirmed my departure, adding the note about the halved deposit. I asked him to send confirmation via email. He did within the hour. The apartment was now hers in writing. As she always claimed she needed space, now she had it, room by room. By mid-morning, I was seated across from a family attorney I had researched weeks earlier but never contacted until now. His office smelled faintly of pine cleaner and worn leather. A clock on the wall ticked just behind his framed certificates. I need something simple, I said. No courtroom drama, just separation of assets and intent. He nodded, pulling a few forms from a drawer. We can start with a preliminary notice and a marital settlement draft. You're asking for division or detachment? Detachment, I replied. She can keep what's hers. I'll document what's mine. No joint assets remain. He passed me a pen, and I began signing in designated spaces. His assistant brought in water, and within 40 minutes, I had everything I needed to make this real. He leaned forward, voice steady. Want us to serve it, or will you deliver the packet? I'll have it sent by courier. She'll read it faster that way. The envelope was thick but tidy, printed with a notice, a checklist of separated items, and a brief personal letter at the front. By Friday afternoon, it left my hands, scanned and signed for by a delivery driver whose name I didn't catch. I watched the tracking update from my phone. Delivered 4:23 p.m. Silence followed for nearly an hour. Then came the new wave of messages. What are you up to? Are you seriously making this legal? We just fought. What the hell? You're taking this too far. The tone had shifted from anger to confusion, then to panic. Her voice cracked between the lines. She seemed to recognize what she'd invited finally. I didn't respond. Later that night, I returned to the garage. My brother had cleared space on the workbench. The boxes were there, stacked evenly, untouched. I moved one onto the table and opened the top. Vinyl records. The one she always said disrupted the frequency with their outdated lyrics. I pulled one out, Dusty Springfield, then paused. Next to it lay the photograph I'd taken before leaving. The kitchen counter, the wedding ring glinting like a silent signature, her deck of affirmation cards splayed underneath. I studied the image. It wasn't sentimental, it was documentary. The last moment of shared space, preserved in perfect alignment. A still image of a sentence she had never expected to be taken seriously. She always said words had power. I simply agreed with her quietly and turned it into motion. Later that night, my lawyer forwarded an email from her, cluttered with emotional outbursts and half-formed counters. He replied on my behalf, keeping things professional, letting her know further communication should follow formal channels. I sat with that for a while, letting the peace settle back in. Her friends had also started to reach out. One of them, a mutual acquaintance from her book club, sent a message with faux concern. She's overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't mean what she said. Another followed. This seems extreme. Don't you think she deserves a conversation? I replied to neither. I'd held enough conversations to realize they were monologues disguised as dialogues, choreographed performances where I was cast as the patient audience. My exit was the only unscripted moment, and that's why it had impact. On Sunday, I sat by the window in the kitchen again. Same cup, same quiet steam. I watched as a crow landed on the balcony railing, stared through the glass, then took off again. A metaphor, maybe, or just a bird following instinct. The ring had left a faint imprint in the photo. A small, perfect circle pressed into the paper like a wax seal. She could spin it however she wanted, blame the retreat wine, the lunar cycle, her need for fluidity. But I hadn't moved out in anger. I'd moved forward with clarity. She built a temple of independence. I simply stopped worshiping there. The apartment I moved into didn't come with much, just 4 blank walls, a quiet balcony, and a long hallway that echoed slightly when I walked down it in the morning. I furnished it sparingly, a mattress on a wooden frame, a small desk, a coffee table that could barely support the weight of 2 used books, and a ceramic mug. I could feel myself expand again in the emptiness. Peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It seeps in slowly, through the way light falls across bare floors or how the kettle whistles in a room with no one to interrupt it. Each morning, I built a routine, brew strong coffee, check emails, and open the windows. I started freelancing again. My inbox had gathered dust during the chaos, but it didn't take long to find a rhythm. Projects came in. Deadlines gave shape to the hours. I picked up boxing at a gym 2 blocks from the building. There's something meditative about sweat, the sharp snap of gloves against pads. My trainer didn't care about backstories. He only nodded when I asked for the early slots, 5:30 a.m., right when the air still held a trace of night. Days turned into something reliable, predictable in a way that felt earned. I made my meals, answered only the calls that mattered, and turned off all alerts after 9 p.m. Her messages became less frequent. The last one came exactly 13 days after the letter was delivered, a single line, sent at 1:14 a.m. You didn't have to ghost me. I read it once, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the blinking cursor in the response field. The word ghost hung in my thoughts. Strange how someone who claimed emotional detachment so religiously now fears absence more than confrontation. I typed a reply, paused. The words came easily. This was never about vanishing. I simply stopped being present where I wasn't welcome. Then I erased it. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer with the note. Add to correspondence. No reply needed. I never heard from her again after that. Word filtered through mutual acquaintances. She took a solo trip to Costa Rica. Shared cryptic quotes on her stories. Something about rising from ashes, about self-alignment. I suppose that's how she copes, through metaphors and filters. I didn't look for updates. Whatever phase she moved into next had nothing to do with me. A month after settling in, I found myself in a thrift bookstore on the west side of the city. I was flipping through a used photography book when a girl in a navy jacket asked if I knew anything about lenses. I told her a little, just enough to make conversation. We stood in the photography section for 10 minutes. She didn't ask about my past. I didn't offer it. It was light, free of subtext. That night, I sat on the balcony with the city buzzing below and a bowl of noodles on my lap. Music played from a speaker, soft jazz bleeding through the screen door. I glanced down at my hand, bare where a ring once rested. The groove had faded. Skin healed. For years, I held on. Hoped things would adjust, that a compromise might lead to a connection again. Instead, I learned that words can build walls just as easily as they can build bridges. And sometimes, the most accurate response is no response at all. She launched her parting shot like a flare. Can't handle my vibe? Pack up. I had. And she returned to find only her echo. There had been no slamming of doors. Just silence, photographs, a folded letter, and space. A measured undoing. Precise and permanent. I scrolled back to the photo I had taken the night I left. The ring on the countertop. The words beneath it. Her deck of affirmation cards acted as an accidental coaster. I stared at it for a while, not with pain, only reflection. She once spoke in rhythms that sparkled, bright bursts of opinion, declarations about what she needed, what I wasn't, what freedom meant. I absorbed each one, waiting for substance to follow the sparkle. When it never did, I left without ceremony. Because I learned that no one clings to a storm just to prove they can withstand it. Some things demand release. And what she found instead of me that night, an apartment rearranged, a ring resting on self-help slogans, a silence that didn't plead, was precisely the closure she said she didn't believe in. Now, the only frequency I answer to is peace, and I'm fluent in it. Completely.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.